The Free State of Congo, Mother Country, Belgium, Colonized Country, Congo, by Jacob, Charlotte, Eliana, and Jack. 6.1 Rationales of Imperialism, the Heart of Darkness. This quote is an example of the white man's burden belief, where it is considered a duty of white European people to colonize indigenous lands and societies in order to justify imperialistic nature of the colonizers. As the speaker believes that we whites, from the point of development, had arrived at must necessarily appear to them savages, the nature of supernatural beings. We approach them with the might of a deity, and so on and so on. By the simple exercise of our will, we can exert for power practically unbounded. King Leopold of Belgium explained his reason to buy the Congo by saying, I will pierce the darkness of barbarism. I will secure to control Central Africa the blessing of civilized government, and I will, if necessary, undertake this giant work alone. He then called Congo the only portion of the globe where civilization had not been yet penetrated. He wanted to plant definitively the standard of civilizations on the soil of Central Africa. This quote exemplifies the ideas of white man's burden because he insists that the people are uncivilized and barbaric, and he needs to help them conform to his ideas of civility. His viewpoints were shared by many people during this time, and that was how he convinced people to support his bid for Congo. This letter from George Washington Williams to King Leopold uses the belief of white man's burden to justify the imperialist effort of King Leopold II to take control over Congo. George Washington Williams says that the Congo needed fostering care, benevolent enterprise, and honest political effort because of his belief that indigenous peoples who aren't located in Europe aren't capable of having a society with practices such as the ones listed. 6.2 State expansion from 1750 to 1900, a map of Africa in 1888 and 1913. Granted to King Leopold II of Belgium, the Congo was territory that was a personal concession for the king, rather than a colony. The king, not the Belgian government, effectively owned and controlled the Congo. Leopold administered the Congo in a notoriously brutal manner, using it to augment his own personal wealth. Congo's wealth, which included its numerous rubber trees, was brutally extracted using what was basically slave labor. This rubber was then exported to fuel the industrial growth of both the 19th and early 20th century in America. Despite the growing economy of Congo, Leopold never visited the territory himself. By 1908, the territory was so poorly managed that an international furor condemning Leopold had erupted. That same year, in an attempt to stem this furor, the Congo was ceded to Belgium and placed under the control of the Belgian government, not its king. Belgium then administered the Congo as a colony. 6.3 Indigenous responses to state expansion from 1750 to 1900. In the Congo, rubber was the main export, but the rubber industry was a cruel one. Punishments like dismemberment or death of family members, flogging, and imprisonment were common. So, out of state and company oppression grew resistance. As the industry grew, rubber extraction methods were becoming more harsher and quotas too high for villagers to meet. So it was ill treatment of the royalty that became the tipping point. So a revolt against the Congo independent state was declared. There were attacks all across the region. Stations from both sides of Kasai River attacked, and even the capital at Luebo was under siege for a time. The Mbanche mission, a 38 rubber factory at Ikumbi and Benamakima, and the village's outposts at Nagi Likoko, Ditutua, and Inapal were targeted soon after. Most attacks were repelled by state officials. As the resistance grew, it became supported in a strange ways, like when their medicine man, Kapili, invented a charm called Tonga Tonga, which was supposed to save the people from rubber demands and protect them by deflecting forced public and militia bullets. His method of gaining support worked and propelled with this new protection, revolts spread across the region. 6.4 Global economic development from 1750 to 1900. Extraction. One of the major exports of the Congo was rubber. It was obtained from a wild species of vines, namely the Langdolfia. After cutting the vines, the workers, in order to extract the rubber, Congolese workers would lather their bodies with latex, which hardened and was painfully scraped off the skin. The high demands for rubber created an almost impossible quota for workers to achieve. So, in order to get the results they wanted, the managers would send armed sentries to maim or kill the families of workers. This was meant to be a motivator. After the rubber was extracted, the gatherers poured the sap into an earthenware pot containing water, placed it on the fire, and stirred in a stick, which they call bazonga. In about 10 minutes, the rubber, owing to the acid in the bazonga, begins to collect around the stick. And as soon as the mass is formed, this is lifted out, placed on a big leaf, and rinsed with clean cold water. Then enveloped in leaves, it is kneaded for a minute or two with hands or feet to press out the remaining moisture. It can be cut up into rough cubes, which are spread dry on a little platform built over the fire. Here it remains for an hour or two before it is placed in loosely made baskets in which the native carries to the town. In order to refine the rubber, they performed a process called vulcanization. Vulcanization is a chemical process by which the physical properties of natural synthetic rubber are improved. Meanwhile, very neatly plated baskets are being prepared from a rattan cane into which the dry rubber is packed, so every basket weighs exactly 5 pounds. And a tin label is attached to each with distinctive number and place of origin. They are then laid out in long rows ready for transport by porters, canoe, rail, and steamer to Europe. One company that grew as a result of the rubber production was the Anglo Belgian India Rubber and Exploration Company. The Abrir Company, also known as the Abir Congo Company, also simply known as the Abir Company, was privately owned by rubber organization by Leopold II. The company was founded with British and Belgian capital and was based in Belgium. By 1898, there was no longer any British shareholders, and the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company changed its name to the Abir Congo Company and its residents for tax purposes to the Free State. Albir enjoyed a boom throughout the late 1890s by selling a kilogram of rubber in Europe that cost them just 1.35 francs for up to 10 francs. This chart shows the growth of Albir's profits from the year 1892 to 1903. The years with the most growth coincided with the increased demand for rubber. 6.5, the economic impact of Belgium's imperialism, chart of the GDP per capita of Congo. This chart illustrates the GDP of Congo from 1820 to 1998. Within the chart, it illustrates that between the years 1820 to 1913, which were the years that Belgium colonized and occupied Congo, the GDP of the Congolese people did not even retain a value. Therefore, it can be concluded from the GDP values that Belgium's colonization of Congo resulted in the prohibition of Congo's economy to the point where people do not even have a value. On the other hand, it can be seen that Belgium has a complete opposite outcome of this from its colonization. As illustrated above, the GDP of Belgium increased by fivefold between the time period of 1820 to 1913. This directly correlates to the GDP of Congo because we can see that as Congo has little or no value to its people while it was occupied, the GDP of Belgium skyrockets. From the correlation of the two charts, it can be concluded that Belgium did not care about the disadvantages to the Congolese people because it was solely seen as an economic resource that Belgium could use to increase their own economy. In the early 1890s, with the invention of bicycles and their widespread usage, the demand for rubber suddenly skyrocketed and started what people called the rubber boom. Luckily for King Leopold II, nearly half of Congo Free State was covered with rubber trees that would have taken over 50 years to fully grow elsewhere. With an increasing demand for rubber from Congo, King Leopold II began to take advantage of the abundance of raw materials. The executive officers under King Leopold II would go into a local town and take the women there as hostages. To free their wives, men had to go into the woods and collect a certain amount of rubber. If they did not fulfill the required amount of rubber, they received a cruel punishment from these officers. Failure to meet the rubber collection quotas was punishable by death. Meanwhile, the force publique, a military force, were ordered to bring back a hand for every bullet they fired, as it was believed that they would otherwise use their bullets for hunting or practice. Sometimes the hands were collected by soldiers of the force publique, sometimes by the villagers themselves. There was even a small wars where villagers attacked neighboring villages to gather hands, since they needed to fill their rubber quotas. As was not usually possible, too much of the population were cutting off hands of the living, which resulted in mutilation and decrease in population and economy. Topic 6.6, cause of migration in interconnected world, and 6.7, effects of migration. Belgian migration to the Congo was limited during the Congo Free State period, with almost about 1,500 Belgians in country in a given year, largely working as civil servants, missionaries, or employees of mining companies. Incentives to migrate from Belgium to Congo were mainly to serve their duty with the white man's burden or to make money at mining companies. Some were coached to go as soldiers to enforce rubber harvesting. However, migration was still minimal. Mass immigration to the colony was never encouraged, nor was the Congolese migration to the metropole. From Congo to Belgium, women would travel there in order to pursue education. Her journey had been undertaken, together with a few well-educated Congolese and even fewer well-educated Congolese women, to pursue her studies in Europe. These situations mainly happened after it became a real colony in 1908. 6.8, causation in the imperial age. As a result of the imperial nature of Belgium, the beginnings of intense revolution and rebellion ensued from early 1900 until 1960. When the Free State of Congo was made in the 1880s, the primary goal was to earn as much profit as possible. Belgium did so using forced labor with no pay whatsoever. Any indigenous member of the Congo had no worth, and the Belgian mercenaries that King Leopold II hired to uphold the law of the land committed atrocities to the people of the Congo that soon gained widespread publicity. After public outrage ensued as a result of the crimes King Leopold II had done towards the Congolese people, King Leopold was forced to give up his colony and make it an official colony of Belgium instead of King Leopold's private domain. The Belgian Congo remained this way until the late 1950s, when the Congolese public started its own revolution of a growing nationalism, which displaced a paternal colonialism. This led to a sense of self-identity and desire for freedom among the citizens of Congo and Belgium. After political unrest and riots ensued for the freedom of Congo in 1960, Belgian government negotiated with Congolese politicians from 13 different political parties, where the politicians both demanded and received independence for Congo. And here is our work cited.